Welcome to Wrestling with Goals, the Conceive, Believe, and Achieve podcast. Today's guest is all the way from Westminster, British Columbia. It is Garfield Gairy. He is the owner of the American Wrestling Company. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Sean. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. You know what? I got your name from Mitch Dodd. I'm assuming he's a mutual friend. He spoke very highly of you. He said that you had some roots here in Canada with wrestling, and that you were able to, or I'm not sure if you still are doing that, because that's what the podcast is for, finding out things about you. But you have coached some big names in wrestling, and maybe we can talk a little bit of where you started wrestling and how you started coaching these names.
Yeah. So I'm actually I'm an original Ontario boy. So
Okay.
Brampton, Turner Fenton, so Cheyenne and Shukin, and then from there I got involved with Matman. So with Chris Kalman. So I'm a product of the Kalmanator. Yeah. So people are actually surprised when they find out that I'm actually original Matman. So my coaches in high school are pretty much Cheyenne and Shukin, Chris Kalman, and Kevin Lomas. And so that's kind of where it all went through. And then after high school, I went out to Guelph for a little bit. And so Doug Cox, shout out to Doug Cox. And then after that, I went back to Brampton for a little bit, started doing a little bit of coaching. And then with the encouragement of my students, they encouraged me to continue wrestling. And so just at the same time as they were doing that, Danny Legale had just won the world championship. So I thought, okay, well, because I actually wanted to coach. So before I finished high school, I knew that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to coach. I was passionate about it. And so I figured if I'm going to learn, I might as well go learn from the best. And at the time, the Burnaby Mountain Wrestling Club was untouchable. They had Danny Gali, Nick Uguala. There's so many guys that were there. But what attracted me was Daniel had just won the world championship. So I was like, okay. A couple months later, packed up my bag and, here came out to the West Coast. And so from there, did some wrestling through Douglas College. Did a couple of years of wrestling there, and just decided that I don't want my body to be wrecked. I'm not pursuing an Olympic dream, and I just saw everybody with torn up bodies, and I just I was just in a car accident. My neck was so hurt, and I was like, okay, I'm good. And I was fortunate though, because the amount of guys that were in around Burnaby Mountain at the time, and then Mike Jones, Dave McKay, Steve Rowe, Justin Abdu, I was able to just learn and absorb so much. I was fortunate to be roommates with Neil Ewers, and just to be able to train with him in the mornings after a run and get his mindset, and being around Danny Legale and get their mindset and sitting back and watching. Because my thing was, I wanted to come out here to BC, spend a couple of years, 3 years was my goal, finish that up, and then go back to Ontario and start a program there. So the only time I ever went back to Ontario after is to visit family or to compete with my club. So I didn't go back to Ontario. So I was really fortunate to learn a lot from those guys, and just learn and see how a world-class athletes prep themselves, how they train, their techniques, and just overall, like I said, living with Neil Ewers, just watching how the professional side of wrestling and learning a lot from those guys, that really helped me a lot. And so once I finished, Mitch Dodd was out here at the time, and he was coaching the Burnaby Mountain development program. Right, so we had a couple of Ontario boys that were out here coaching the BC program. And so once I was done, I joined him. And so I was a provincial clinician and working with the development program at Burnaby Mountain. And so he and I partnered. And that's another guy I learned a lot from. Mitch is very meticulous in wrestling. He's like he would be the same as like a wine connoisseur when it comes on to wrestling. Just very, very picky, about positioning, how you move, how you prep. So that's another person I got a chance to learn a lot from as well. And so we coached together at the Burnaby Mountain program for 3 years. Did very well there. We actually brought in 5 national titles. And so I got a chance to learn from him. Ian White, who was the president of BC Wrestling at the time, he was kind of like the do-it-all person. And so that's another person I saw. Well, how do you run a wrestling program, but how do you actually? Because like he would show up. I don't know if you've seen Ian way back in the days in his setup. So he would show up. He would drive all of us. He was a bus driver. He was a chef. So we'd show up at tournaments, and he would set up pretty much a kitchen outside of the tournament. And so as athletes, our athletes basically showed up at the tournament. They were driven there. On their break, they would essentially just walk outside to hot soup, fresh sandwiches, fresh fruits, and so that was incredible. So I saw how someone else did it as well, and so that was a really good period for myself. It was a huge learning period. We had a lot of success, a lot of athletes, like Raj Verdi, Rafiq Charania, Arjun Buller, just to name a few that were in the program at the time. So not only was I blessed to be around all these guys that I got a chance to learn from, but I also had a whole group of athletes who were really hungry. So I think I just landed in a good sweet spot at the time. After that, we walked away from Burning Mountain. Both and I, we actually both left at the same time. And there was a group that I coached that came and said, hey, because Burning Mountain, we were pretty much volunteering, right? Just like everyone else, we were just volunteering. And so in 2005, when we left, a couple of guys came and said, hey, we're starting this club, a Tulsa Wrestling Club out in Surrey. We'll pay you to coach. And I was like, and they were like, we'll pay you $1,000 a month to coach. So that was 2005. So that was, part-time. That was actually really good money. Mm-hmm. But in my mind, I was like, okay, you're going to pay me to coach. I was doing it for free anyway. Okay, cool. That's great. And so I said, okay, I'll come over. I'll coach for 4 years. And I was doing other things at the same time. And I thought, this is great. I can, it's like a part-time income. And I started doing that. And just from being around, like I said, from Neil Ewers and, guys like Danny Einhorn, I just took everything that I learned and I said, okay, well, I'm just going to dump it into this program. And so we did that. And at the same time, I was fortunate because Frank Mensah, he was out here at the time. And he had hurt his knee, had an operation, and he ended up living with me. So while he was rehabbing, he basically would come into the Tulsa club and train. So I was just super lucky. So I had 4 athletes, plus Frank Mensah would come in and train. And so, we had this world-class athlete rehabbing in a small barn on a farm in Cloverdale. And so, those are the best areas for wrestling to grow, I believe. Because it wasn't comfortable in the wintertime. It was body heat that heated up the room, literally. It was a little fan in the corner, and it squealed, right? And so we had, 6 dedicated athletes, parents and everyone. And like I said, it was literally on a farm, the Sandu farm out in Cloverdale. And the club itself really grew. We had guys like Manjot Sandhu, Gurdeep Disla, and of course, a lot of people know Amar Desi, Param Desi. So those guys all came from that little group of 6 that were there. And of course, Frank rehabbing in the program. So not only what those guys got a chance to learn as well, too, was that they got to learn the mindset of a world-class athlete, right? Because he would just come in there and just beat the crap out of those guys. And so they picked that up, right? So it's kind of like having the little puppies and then the big dog comes in and just murders them. And they get to pick up the mindset. So for me, that was another blessing as a coach as well. And so that's essentially, what I did. I worked on my business and I coached. And people came and asked us for personal training. And so we got a chance to do personal training. And so where it grew into a full-time, it's pretty much a full-time gig. And then we were lucky enough, I was dating someone at the time. And so she would go in to her work and she would talk to her boss about, the guy that she was dating and his vision and how much he loved kids and, what I was trying to do with wrestling as far as, because I always looked at wrestling as it's a tool to build community. I think wrestling is the best tool to build communities, especially when it comes down to kids. And so she would kind of see the passion. And so her boss happened to be the owner of a mining company. And so he worked in the mining industry. And this is kind of where it kind of gets like, it's more like a dream story that happened. We had these incredible athletes. They were winning the Pan Ams. They were winning the Nationals. And this guy calls me in and just for a meeting. And so I go in and we're having a conversation, and he's asking me about my goals and dreams. And so Frank and I were putting together a pretty large size program, right? And so he was just asking me questions about it, and I, just kind of spilling the beans. And he had asked me how much it would be to actually get this program going, and I gave him a number, and he said, okay, well, what's the first step? And I said, okay, well, the first step is, at the time was 2007 Pan Ams in Panama. And so he asked me, well, how much would that be for you to go and learn? Because a part of me going to these tournaments was to go and actually learn and to see if what we were teaching was consistent with what the rest of the world was teaching. Mm-hmm. And I gave him a figure, and he said, okay, well, come to my house. I'll give you a check. And I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever, right? We hear it all the time.
Yeah.
So I jump in my SUV at the time on the Monday morning, drove to his house, and he came outside and he gave me a check. And he just says, what I need you to do is I need a receipt from it. So it's through Canada Wrestling, BC Wrestling, whoever. And I was like, wow, okay, cool. And so that was, not a lot of people actually know this. Some people do actually know this. And so from 2007 to 2013, we were essentially sponsored to do wrestling. And so like even Frank Mensah, when he made his Olympic run, this gentleman gave us a large portion of money so that he can go on the Olympic run. Because what we were really interested in with wrestling was how we could actually impact the community. And one of the things that this gentleman saw, he saw that, well, what's happening right now with the world? He said, well, Garfield, two-thirds of the population of the world is on the move because of wars and everything else. And a large number of them are going to land here in Canada. And we don't have an infrastructure that's teaching communities how to actually get together. And so he said, well, with what you're doing, you're having these kids from all these different communities, and they're actually coming together, they're training, they're learning each other. And so what had happened in Vancouver, there was some violence that went on with kids where, one kid had died. And so he just looked at wrestling as a really good way of doing that. So he was, he's older. And so that was his, I'm going to mess this up, philanthropy. Yeah. Anyway, so that's kind of what he saw. And so we continue to build a program from that. So with Khalsa, we were fortunate with Khalsa because it was the East Indian community, and they're all about wrestling, as you know. And so with that was also another blessing, because it's hard to get into a community, everybody's on board, everybody's serious about it. It's not just a fun thing for everybody. And yes, I do understand that their community, there's a balance. Sometimes they kind of go a little bit far, to one side. And so it's kind of to reel them back in. But they did give me kind of the authority, like this is, as in their community, the coach is like the guru, right? So, I'm the one who's raising the kids is what they told me. And so I could actually reel them back in so it doesn't go too far one way. And so we did that. And eventually another guy came from Abbotsford, and he said, hey, we're looking to set up a club. They were friends with the guys from Khalsa. Can you come out and help us? And so we went out there and we set up a club for them and helped them, get them some coaches, get them going. And at the same time, what we were doing, we, instead of going, through Canada where we'd go, west to the east, which is so expensive and we don't get a lot of tournaments, we're right on the border here. So we spent a lot of time in the United States coaching there, just a ton of time. In fact, there was actually a period when I would actually show up at the nationals. People were like, "Oh, you're still coaching?" And that's because I just spent a lot more time going down there. And I think we talked about that, the differences between how you were treated in Canada, especially if you have a successful program, how you're treated in Canada versus the United States. When we would go down there and we had successful athletes, we were treated very well with a lot of respect. Because what I found was the coaches in the United States, it's not to bash our coaches, but what I found was that they had a lot of respect for people who have produced great athletes, because what they understood was that for you to have a successful athlete, your athletes spend a lot of time in honing their craft, but the coach also spent a lot of time. And coaches who have success know this. It's not a 9-to-5 gig, and so you're spending a lot of time, mental time, everything preparing, like really working on athletes, giving them all the tools for them to become successful. So I find that they have a lot of appreciation for that. They just recognize that. So even if that coach, and we've had areas where the coach just doesn't like you, they have respect for you. And so where I found in Canada, it was almost like you were doing something wrong if you produce an athlete. Like, you're pushing that kid and you're doing this. It's, so there's definitely that component. So we spent a lot of time down south. And so from there, we built that program. And then someone else came to us and asked us to set up another program in Vancouver. So that program, they actually won a national title as well. So along with the Culture Club, that program there. And then so Frank and I then went down to Vancouver and started another program that is now what people see as Coast Wrestling Academy. And so, yeah, we spent quite a few years coaching in Canada, and in the US as well. So I've just been really lucky in wrestling itself, that I've been able to find a passion, and that somewhere along the line someone has helped me out and someone else kept on helping me out, and I got financially supported right through a private individual who saw what we were doing and decided to help us out. And then a couple of years ago I took some time off for family, and then just this year I decided to come back in again and start coaching. So I came in as the American Wrestling Company, which some people in I've talked to people in Canada like, oh no, it should be like Canadian Wrestling Company or something like that. But I just never wanted to limit myself to just Canada alone, because I spent a lot of time there. Right. And I believe that since we have a tool for building communities, this is something that we can do in all communities. So that's kind of where I am right now. So right now I'm a free bird. I work primarily with the Coast Wrestling Academy, and I work with some other programs here as well. And so my goal is to see wrestling grow. And I don't believe that we've done a very, very, and I say we, I'm talking about myself as well. We've done a very good job in promoting wrestling and telling the stories. That's why I really appreciate what you're doing, because you're actually telling the stories of wrestling, right? Especially here in Canada. It's all we've always seen as, like, the quiet guys, the humble guys, and the dungeon sport, and but we have such an amazing product and such an amazing, like, you can imagine how, I'm sure from talking to so many people, how many people the wrestling has changed their lives. So many guys I've talked to that said, if it wasn't for wrestling, I would have been in jail. I would have done this. This would have happened to me. And so that's a story that we need to tell, because, you think about it, we have people who are blind, people who have one hand, people no legs, men, women, any size, it doesn't matter. We just have this thing that can benefit so many people, because you think about, if you put a kid into wrestling, they're going to get a mentor and a coach that's going to guide them through, no matter, they're going to spend 3 to 4 days a week plus weekends with them. They're going to be around like-minded people, right? All the time, just like-minded people. They're going to be forced to grow and to correct themselves. And you can be put in situations where you lose, right? There's nothing better than losing and being able to be humble and saying, okay, if you want something, you're going to have to work for it. So like even right now, when I'll go into schools and I'll do 1 week gym class. And one of the things I'll have, as I'm about to demonstrate a group, I'll have someone stand in the middle and I'll ask the kids, okay, what do you think is the toughest part of wrestling? Right. And, they'll say, well, taking someone down, holding someone down, the work. And I'll tell them, no, the hardest part of wrestling is to be able to go walk from the edge of a mat into the center of the mat by yourself, and knowing that you got to face someone else and you have no one to blame. There's no timeout. If you make a mistake, there's no someone else is going to pick up for you. And it's just mano a mano. But to just stand in the center of the mat, it takes so much, like, what it's like to wrestle, right? You get to a tournament, you feel like you got to go poo up every minute. You just, you feel like you got to pee. You're nervous as can be, and how many years that's for. So I believe that's what Dan Gable talks about. Like, once you've wrestled, once you just walk into the center of the mat, like, everything else becomes easy, right? So, so that's kind of like my journey through wrestling, skipping through some of a little bit of details, but, I'd like to see the sport grow. All right. I'd like to see our national body. I don't know if it's getting involved more, but I definitely would like to see our national body do a lot more for our sport. I'd like to see, I don't know about Ontario's provincial body, but I know for our provincial body, I'd like to see them do a lot more. And I'm not saying that they're not doing, but I feel like the wrong pieces consistently are put in. So you have positions, but it seems like somebody keeps putting the wrong pieces in those positions, and we're getting athletes that are complaining, right? So maybe there's complaining behind closed doors, but athletes are complaining, and it's I've been involved now in the coaching. Let's say I started coaching in 1999, voluntary, became professional in 2005. But we need a lot more change. We can't have so many of our athletes that are going through, so if you look at, like, you had Amar Desi on the program, right? And so you had a kid who's been wrestling since he's 9 years old. He went into a professional system down in the United States, right? He actually, not a lot of people know this, but he actually received the second largest scholarship ever in the province of BC, right? It was almost $200,000. And so he wrestled NCAA Division One. He was a multi-time All-American. Then he trained down there, right, with the Ohio RTC. So he's been a part of real professional programs. And then he comes back here to Canada, and it's like, he's seen the differences, right? And so you have a lot of athletes who are frustrated with their position. And I believe that we need to grow the sport more. We need to tell the story more. We need to find ways to get more kids involved, right? So
Yeah, we had Amar Desi on the show here, and that was one of the discrepancies that we talked about, is in the training. It's vastly different. If you go into I spent my time in the U.S. My college years in the U.S. In Fresno, California, at the junior college there, and then in Michigan, and then with the Michigan Wrestling Club. And when you talked about the difference of training, going to, you said you went to look at how other countries were training. It was a culture shock for me, and I've told the story before about when I was training with Steve Frazier, and he kicked the shit out of me. Now, he was an Olympic champion, but he was 38 years old at the time. I had no idea who he was. I caught him in 2 moves and pissed him off, and he didn't let me go for an hour. He just beat the crap out of me for an hour, and I had never actually experienced that type of training before, that aggressive type of training before. It was a real culture shock. And then going into the wrestling room in Michigan and just being, you're a high school wrestler from Ontario, and you come in there, and their high school wrestlers are far beyond what you are. So you had to work your way, through that. And, sorry, you talk about the gaps that are there. When you went and identified the gaps, in training, how hard was it to, bring it back into your training at the room? Because you've got these wrestlers that are used to, kind of, I guess, the status quo of training, and then you turn it up a notch. Like, how did they handle that?
Well, it depends, right? So,
Mhm.
so when I coached at the Culture Club, when we were on the farm, right, that was an easy way. I didn't recognize it until after I left that, but that was an easy way to train, right? Because it was very raw. And like I said, having Frank Mensa coming in that room, it really turned up the mentality. He's got a very, very aggressive mentality. I believe that if he hadn't been injured, and if he here's a guy who's a young guy at 20 years old, he's lost his mom and his dad, right? And so a lot of that plus injury at the time, I believe that he would have been one of our Olympic medalists. And so I was fortunate, right, for his misfortune, and so he came into the room. So being on that farm, what it did, and also too with with Amr and his dad also has that wrestling is serious, right? And so with that, it was easier to have that because it was in a farm. And then also to the dads that were there, they're from old school India, farm mentality. So work hard, be disciplined, listen to everything adults say. And then also because we spent so much time in the United States, those guys picked up that attitude from those kids, right? And so they picked up that because they were able to pick up that attitude when they came in, they were able to recognize the mental difference. So in that training room, that gap wasn't that hard. So everyone that was coming, so those kids, they took over that room, and so they would kind of govern who was coming in and the attitude of somebody who was coming in. Where the gap was, where I had to, okay, so once we left that, I had to then talk to people about the reality of wrestling, right? It's being very upfront with these guys about the reality of wrestling. That, okay, so you say you want to, so one of the things I would say to some of these kids, like I have a kid right now, he wants to be an Olympic champion. Okay, great. No problem. That's a great dream. I'm all for those dreams. And so he's born in Canada. And so I would say to him, first thing I said to him was, okay, well, since that's what you want to do, here's what I need you to do the research and find me the Canadian-born male Olympic champion, and then we'll kind of identify who that person is. And so he's like, oh, Daniel Legali, and I was like, well, no, Daniel Legali is actually, he was born in Nigeria, came here when he was like 22 years old, right? So that's a man coming into a program, a system, and then So I said, okay, so you're trying to be the first of a kind. So you need to understand the reality is that, okay, I'll tell you a story. So I had one of my athletes, he went to the World Championships in 2011, Cadet Worlds. And so I said to him, when you're there, I want you to go around and talk to some of the guys, talk to some of the other teams, right? He's outgoing anyway, so he does stuff like that. And so he went and he was speaking to, I believe it was Belarus. And so he was asking them about the differences. And so what they told him was that the difference between us and you is that for you guys, this is fun, right? This is a fun thing that you do, right? Wrestling is just this fun thing. For us, it's really serious. It's what we do, right? It's like a profession. It's like a job. They approach it from that mentality. So with that gap is to get the guys to understand that you're trying to do something of the first. This is a fun thing for you. Win or lose, you'll still have your education. You'll still have, life will still be great for you. This is like something you do outside of what you kind of do. The people that you're trying to compete against, this is all they do. This is where their life is going to be. And in fact, in some of those places, this is how they're going to pull their family out of whatever economic condition that they have. So it's a serious thing for them. They don't joke with it. Same thing. I mean, you've been in the U.S., so a lot of those guys. My dad wrestled, my uncle wrestled, I'm representing my community when I go on the mat. It's a big deal for them. It's all like there's some of these high school guys. That's all they do, and you don't have to tell them to go to practice, right? We tend to tell some of our guys, oh, the kid's gonna burn out and so forth. It's like, all right, cool, but if you're serious about it, the guys who you're coming against, that's their, I remember when I asked Steiner and Zaleski when they were recruiting Amr, I said, well, what do you guys look for? They said, we look for guys. Number one, we look for guys who love it, right? They said they gotta love. We don't care how good they are. If they don't love it, we don't recruit them. And so you're going up against guys who literally love the thing that we say is going to burn you out. So how do you compete against that? We're telling you that if you train too hard, you're going to burn out. That other guy is saying, this is like, this thing that's going to quote unquote burn you out is like, it drives my love, right? So it's getting them to understand the reality of where you want to go. And now you make a decision, right? You're either going to be a Canadian wrestler or international wrestler. They're not the same thing at all, right? And so if you make a decision you're going to be a Canadian wrestler, okay, you're going to train a certain way. But if you decide you're going to be an international wrestler, you're going to have to make that commitment that this is what you're going to do. It comes, it's your God, your sport, right? Your family, like you put everything on hold for that portion of your life, because the people that you're competing against, that's what they do. And the other thing I always remind the guys is that you have a short window. You have a short window for success, because if injury doesn't get you, the economics in our country is going to get you. You're not financially supported till you're like in your mid-20s, late. After you're done school, you're on your own, and you're expected either to produce financially or have your sport produce for you. And unfortunately, we don't have those big dollars, that we're being thrown at. So I think once you kind of once I get to the reality of this is the sport itself, right? If you're just a Canadian mindset, you're gonna have a real hard time when you go international. If you go international, right? So you have to change your mindset now and understand the reality of this sport, and understand that all the kids out there that are your age, they're really serious about the sport. It's not a fun thing for them.